What is going on, guys? It is the start of the baseball season, and right here, I'm with the man, Alex Awesemo Baker. We're going to talk about the MLB season and just how to approach building lineups using some of the tools that are available over on Awesemo.com. Do us a favor as you guys are watching the video, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and leave a comment below if you have any questions or just any got an insight at all on any of the stuff that we have going on the site. First, Alex, how are you doing? And then also, how you feeling about baseball season starting?
Doing good. Yeah, stoked about baseball. We're adding a lot of betting this year, so I'm like, man, these are going to be some epic 15-game parlays and stuff. And then from a DFS standpoint, like it's pretty interesting. There've been a lot of rule changes recently in baseball. Like you got that 3-batter per reliever rule, and then this year they added the universal designated hitter. So and I guess my old edge of only going with American League teams because there are more combinations of stacks might not be as effective this year.
Yeah, it kind of evens out the playing field, especially when we get into the World Series. But now just kind of talking big picture here, somebody signs up for our site for the first time, and there's a lot of data. There's a lot of different tools, a lot of different information. What's the first thing you would recommend people to look at when it comes to our site and just helping them get information to build MLB lineups?
So the first thing I'm doing any day that I'm building MLB lineups is I'm looking at our game's going to be postponed today because there's absolutely nothing worse than you set your lineup and then you get that big fat 0 because the game didn't happen. So we're always projecting what we think the chances are that game will be postponed. So you can find that on the projections page among other places. So CL 0% here. So that would mean I'm good to start building some lineups without worrying as much about a rain out.
Yeah, and that's also something that, in general, we shouldn't have to deal with in NBA. But of course, every once in a while, there's a leaky roof. There's a building that catches on fire when a game's being played. I think there was a Toronto game a couple weeks ago. So, in general, this is something unique to MLB DFS, where we do have to pay attention to the weather, and it's something that people should keep in mind as we start a new baseball season. And then also, something that's way different about baseball is just overall the variance of it and how we're looking to make stacks maybe to try to correlate players together. So I want to ask you that also is what is it about MLB DFS that makes it more different than, say a sport like PGA or NBA, for instance?
So I definitely approach MLB a lot differently than NBA in particular because it's more like focusing on the big picture as opposed to like the little pieces. So there's like so many batters and pitchers on any given slate because a lot of times you got 15 games of MLB going on that like a lot of times it's like you just pick 5 guys from the team and you got to get lucky after that. It's more focused on like how the team's going to do overall than the individual players. So, I mean, how do you usually kind of like think of MLB differently than other sports?
Yeah, ownership matters a lot more. It's not to say that ownership doesn't matter in a sport like NBA, but, in general, let's say, LeBron is late scratched and some 3K players starting and we're projecting him for like 30 fantasy points. There's just not that much variance in NBA compared to baseball, where baseball, you can get somebody who's a minimum salary hitter leading off. It doesn't guarantee that they're going to get any hits. You could get somebody who easily scores 0 fantasy points. It's not something that happens as much in NBA, which is also why I think we should go over to the projections page and just kind of look at what some of this information means and why it is important for baseball. So when you're thinking of ownership when it comes to MLB DFS, Alex, why is it so much more important than it is in other sports?
I think the ownership is more important than MLB because the projections are less important. I mean, it's kind of a circular argument, but you got to have some sort of edge that you're looking for. Now, when it comes to pitchers, like you pretty much have a good idea of how many points they're going to score. Like that's where the projections really come in handy. It's going to be like plus or minus 10 to the projection. And usually if you get more than the projection, like which happens about half the time, you're going to be in a good shape. So you don't have to worry as much about that. But the hitter variance is insane. So like you might have a guy projected for 8. You don't have any better idea if he's going to get 0 or 20 points. So you can really kind of go for some long shots in MLB. And because of that correlation, like you can put a bunch of guys that individually might be bad plays together, and then that could be a good play.
Yeah, and one thing that stands out immediately for anybody wondering, the projections we're looking at right now, just opening day for the 2022 season, just to kind of get a feel for, what some of the data is that we're looking at right now. And then as we go through, we could look at some of this information and draw conclusions. And one thing that stands out to me at first glance, Alex, is there's like, I don't know, 10 or so of the most popular plays of them. Nearly half of them are San Diego Padres hitters. What do you make of that information when you look at the projections page?
Yeah, so for this particular slate, there's one game that's really hot in Arizona, and then all the other games are like 40 or 50 degrees because the MLB like starts insanely early in the year. So like obviously that one game is going to have like so much better conditions for batting than the other games. But even like the best hitting conditions are far from a guarantee. So like that's where the top stacks comes in. We have the Padres as average of 23% owned, but only a 16% chance of being the highest scoring stack of the day. So that's where you can be like, okay, I don't know exactly what team's going to go off today, but I could be better off taking the field than a very popular team, even if they are good that day.
And then just looking at the top stacks page for reference right here to what you were talking about before, we have the Padres showing as projected for a 16.2% chance to be the top stack of the slate, while also projecting for a 23.4% ownership share. For somebody who's looking at this information for the first time, what do those numbers mean?
So the top stack percentage, it is out of 100%, obviously. So it means that San Diego, 16% of the time, is going to be the highest scoring stack. And I think it's usually safe to say that the highest scoring stack is going to be the winning stack in a GPP. There is some salary cap constraints that if San Diego is more expensive, maybe a value stack might sneak in there. But generally, the bats winning the tournament and the pitchers, this is whatever the best ones are with that stack. So we can say, okay, 16% of the time, San Diego is going to win the slate, but that means 84% of the time it's going to be another stack. And 84% is a lot bigger than 16%, obviously. So that kind of gives me the confidence that even if I think San Diego is in a great spot, which they are, you can get a lot of ownership advantage just by taking some slightly less popular teams.
And then looking at our leverage score, which for those of you, if you just look at the math, I think most people will be able to figure out that the leverage score, it's ownership share minus top stack percentage. When you see a team that's so negatively leveraged like the San Diego Padres, I know you said that means that there's a lot of other teams that are, maybe under-owned or a better chance to succeed relative to their ownership percentage. But looking at a team with the negative 7.2% ownership share in San Diego, if you're playing 150 lineups, would that make you want to go underweight to the field on Padres stacks, be off them altogether, just use some of these hitters as one-offs? Like, where would you stand on that kind of strategy?
It definitely doesn't make me want to fade the team completely. Like, you can still use them. The important part is you need to have at least a couple plays in your lineup that are more likely to succeed than the ownership if you hope to get an advantage on the field. So if you go with San Diego, you best be picking some stack that might be a little bit lower owned or some pitcher combination that no one else is going to have. Because if you just pick all the best plays in MLB, they're not that likely to succeed, and a lot of people are going to have them. So that's the worst combo.
And then I want to ask you about the top value percentage column here, because top value percentage is this team's odds to be a top scoring stack, relative to their points per dollar. And I want to know, when would you value the top value percentage, and when would you be looking more at just the top stack percentage?
So the top value percentage, since people are looking for value when they build lineups, that often like explains why the ownership is high on some of these teams. So like most of the time, the top value teams are going to be like pretty high owned. And on this slate, it's not like a huge factor, but you got Pittsburgh with 21% chance of being the top value stack. It's only 7% chance of being the top stack. So sometimes you can find some really, really good fades of just an average team that's cheap that everyone's going to be on. But like for some reason, I always find it's the Kansas City Royals too. But like it's like, this team is 500 for a reason. So most of the time they're not going to succeed. And if you can figure out that a lot of people are going to be on them, that's a good fade.
And then as we also kind of use this to launch into talking about pitchers, I want to know how often would you be looking to maybe stack against a top pitcher that might be projecting to be overowned in our tools?
That can be a really interesting strategy to get leverage directly on some high-owned pitchers. So the one thing is generally building a stack against a really good pitcher or a really good pitching spot in general is not the most profitable way to build a lineup, just because that can be a low percent chance. And just because the starting pitcher on the other side like does a little bit worse, that doesn't mean that you're going to get the highest scoring stack. That's still a lot of other things that have to go right. So in general, I think that like you can make some solid lineups banking on that leverage. And there's some instances where a bad pitcher is high owned, and then you can really profit on leverage. But generally, you want to kind of pick a less uphill path to success than kind of a unlikely chance that a top pitcher is going to completely blow up.
And then we could start looking at some of the top pitchers now too, if we bring up the top pitchers tool. And one thing that stands out as this comes to opening day, and not that we're talking about, strategy individually for opening day, but I do think it's useful to look at these tools with some sort of context of the players. A pitcher like Robbie Ray on DraftKings for the first slate of the year is crazy underpriced. He was the AL Cy Young this year, and for whatever reason, DraftKings puts up the pricing. Maybe they forgot last year happened. They're like, look, Robbie Rose wasn't great 2 years ago. So they open up the season pricing him at $6,300. As a result, he's projected right now for 66% ownership. He has the best odds of being a top value pitcher, the best odds of being one of the top 2 scoring pitchers overall on DraftKings. So how would you weigh all these factors? The cheap price, the high likelihood of success, and then also the really high ownership?
Yeah, I think that one's a head scratcher because in Minnesota on Thursday, it's supposed to be 36 degrees. So, like, if this game happens, then the conditions are going to be really good for Robbie Ray, who's an awesome pitcher, at least based on last year, which is about as far back as you want to go with a pitcher. So, he's an awesome play, but everyone's on him. That's one of those spots where I think. You just look at the numbers. He's projected for, let's see, in the projections we have him for 20 points. If he goes over 20 at 6K, you're not going to, he could be a winning part of a GPP for sure. That's going to happen like half the time. So sometimes you just have to take those odds, even though he can't win you a tournament. He can only lose you a tournament at that ownership.
And then just looking through some of these numbers and just the other pitchers we have here, and the pitchers in general for opening day, even though it's a lot of aces, the only guy who's really expensive, at least on DraftKings for this slate, is Max Scherzer, 10,700. I just want to know your take. Looking at the numbers we have available to us, who else would you be prioritizing just based on the information we have here, and why? If somebody was looking at this, how would they arrive to some of the same conclusions that you do as, one of the best, most successful DFS players ever?
So I think that on this slate, like it does look like the value falls off pretty quick. Ohtani at 7K, really tough matchup versus Houston, but that one looks kind of interesting. You can go for some leverage with like Max Fried or Shane Bieber, guys that have a higher chance of being one of the top 2 pitchers of the night compared to their ownership. And like I think that usually the way I build lineups is I'll pick my stacks and then I'll make whatever pitchers that fit in with that lineup. Because I feel like pitchers don't usually win you or lose you the tournaments. It's the stacks.
Yeah, and for sure, there's not every once in a while a pitcher will throw a no-hitter or something like that. But in general, I agree with you. It's a lot of times the team that goes out and scores 20 runs, they're nearly guaranteed to be the team that's going to be in the optimal lineup, where pitchers could have a little bit more variance, even though the top end pitchers like a Max Scherzer are generally a lot more consistent than some of the lower end pitchers or top end hitters. Alex, is there anything else you want to tell the people as we head into the first slate of MLB DFS? Just any kind of overarching thoughts or strategy standpoints?
Yeah, I mean, MLB is really interesting from a strategy standpoint. One other thing I'd say is just because like one guy is high owned and another is low owned doesn't mean necessarily that like that combination of players will be low owned. Like, because like sometimes you're building your MLB lineups and it kind of like funnels you into a certain construction. Like you pick that expensive stack at Coors, like almost all those lineups are going to have that cheap value pitcher, and not many are going to have that like stud pitcher. So like thinking about things like from a higher level and just being like, okay, this combination of players might be a little bit less popular just because it's tough to make work. That's where it kind of like plays to your advantage, and you can make some interesting stacks. Like you don't always have to go like 5-3 on DK or 4-4 on FanDuel, but when you do deviate from that, you want to do it for a good reason, like being able to fit some guys that are tough to fit.
Yep, totally makes sense. And then also keep in mind, every time you guys are stacking, you're playing multiple players from the same team. It's just added correlation in a sport with a lot of variance. So just a way to try to capture as much upside as possible, because I know that's going to be something popular as we start baseball season, is just people asking us, why is stacking important? And I kind of laid out some of the reasoning right there, but I think that's a good thing for us to close with is, Alex, why is stacking so important for MLB DFS in tournaments?
So the reason why stacking is so important is because, okay, so each player in an MLB game is like going to average somewhere around 4 plate appearances. But if they get that extra 9 plate appearances for the team, then that's a 25% increase to their projection, essentially. Plus, you got the fact that, like, if guys are on base, that generally makes batting statistics go up. In addition, like if there are more runs on the board, they're going to face weaker pitchers on the other side. So you got a lot of variables kind of like working in your favor if you pick a lot of guys from the same team. It doesn't work every night, but playing the odds in general, stacking is a proven strategy.
That is going to do it for us. Thank you guys very much for watching. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Good luck this season.